James Carter adjusted the lapel of his suit jacket, his fingers brushing over the worn fabric. Though it wasn't brand new, it held sentimental value. It was the suit he'd worn to Ethan's graduation years ago. Today, it seemed fitting to wear it again, as he embarked on a journey equally as important, celebrating his granddaughter Mia's 10th birthday. The airport was bustling, a symphony of rolling suitcases, distant announcements, and hurried footsteps. James clutched his ticket, carefully printed and folded in his pocket, as he navigated through the crowd. His heart swelled with excitement, imagining Mia's face lighting up when he surprised her with the gift he'd painstakingly chosen, a handcrafted music box engraved with her name. Reaching the check-in counter, he presented his ticket with a warm smile. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm here to check in for my flight to Chicago." Emma Stone barely glanced at him. With her perfectly pressed uniform and an air of detached efficiency, she exuded an aura of authority. Her eyes flicked from James to the ticket he held out. The corners of her mouth tightened. "You're in the wrong line, sir," she said curtly, her tone clipped. James frowned, glancing at the sign above the counter. "But this is for executive class, isn't it?" "Yes, and this line is for passengers who actually have executive tickets." She looked him up and down, her gaze lingering on his scuffed shoes. James hesitated, the words stinging. "I do have an executive ticket. It's right here." He extended it again, his hand trembling slightly. Emma snatched the ticket, inspecting it with exaggerated scrutiny. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, but she quickly masked it with a thin, dismissive smile. "Fine. You're checked in. Next time, make sure you know where to go." James's smile faltered, but he nodded politely. "Thank you, ma'am." As he moved toward security, he felt the weight of her gaze lingering on him, accompanied by a faint snicker. He tried to shake it off. Today was a celebration, and nothing, not even her attitude, would dampen his spirits. Boarding began, and James patiently waited for his group to be called. When it was time for executive class passengers, he stepped forward with confidence. However, as he reached the gate, Emma reappeared, blocking his path. "Excuse me, sir. We're boarding executive passengers now," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. James blinked. "Yes, that's me." Her laugh was sharp and incredulous. "You're kidding, right? Executive class is for our premium passengers. You'll need to wait for your section." James held out his ticket, his voice firm but calm. "I am in executive class. See for yourself." Emma snatched the ticket again, her expression hardening as she realized her mistake. But instead of apologizing, she doubled down. "Fine, but don't hold up the line," she snapped, waving him through like an inconvenience. James walked to his seat, ignoring the murmurs and stares from other passengers. He settled into the plush executive class seat, letting out a sigh of relief. The hum of anticipation returned. Mia's birthday, the family gathering, the joy awaiting him. But peace was short-lived. "Excuse me." Emma's voice rang out sharply. She was standing beside him, hands on her hips. "There's been a mistake. You need to move." James looked up confused. "A mistake?" "Yes. You're not supposed to be here." He glanced around, noticing the other passengers turning to watch. Embarrassment crept over him. "But this is my assigned seat. Here's my ticket." Emma's jaw tightened. "Sir, I don't have time for this. Please collect your things and move to the back of the plane." "The back? But my ticket says." "Do I need to call security?" she interrupted, her voice rising. The murmurs grew louder. James could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on him. His cheeks burned, but he refused to be intimidated. "No need for that," he said quietly, rising from his seat. "If this is what you think is best, I'll move." He gathered his belongings, his hands trembling with a mix of anger and humiliation. As he made his way to the back of the plane, he heard a child's voice whisper, "Why are they making him move, Mommy?" The back row was cramped and uncomfortable, a stark contrast to the spacious executive class seats. James squeezed into his assigned spot, his knees brushing the seat in front of him. He stared out the window, willing himself to focus on Mia, her laughter, and the joy that awaited him. But the indignities weren't over. When the drink cart came by, Emma deliberately skipped over him, serving the passengers on either side. When he tried to call her over, she pretended not to hear. "Ma'am," he said, raising his voice slightly. She turned, her expression irritated.
"What?"
"I'd like a glass of water, please." She sighed dramatically, as though he'd asked for something unreasonable. Without a word, she poured a glass and placed it on his tray, with a sharp clink. "Thank you," he said, his tone steady. She didn't respond, walking away without a glance. Hours passed, but the tension lingered. James could feel the disdain in Emma's actions, the unspoken judgment in the eyes of some passengers, and the awkward avoidance of others. "Excuse me, sir," a voice said softly. James turned to see a middle-aged woman seated across the aisle. Her expression was kind, but hesitant. "I just wanted to say, I saw what happened earlier, and I'm so sorry. It wasn't right." James smiled faintly. "Thank you. I appreciate your words. You shouldn't have been treated like that," she continued. "It's just, people should know better." "They should," James agreed. "But sometimes they don't." The woman nodded, her eyes sad. She looked like she wanted to say more but hesitated, her gaze flicking toward Emma, who was now chatting animatedly with another passenger as though nothing had happened. James returned his gaze to the window, the city lights below growing brighter as they neared their destination. The plane's descent mirrored the sinking feeling in his chest. Despite everything, he clung to a quiet resolve. Tomorrow, he would be with Mia. Tomorrow, there would be joy. And perhaps, in some way he couldn't yet foresee, today's trials would lead to something greater. Little did Emma, or anyone else, know the profound impact her actions would soon have, not just on James, but on the entire airline. As the plane landed and the passengers began disembarking, James remained seated. He had learned long ago to let the rush subside before making his way out. The air around him still felt heavy, laced with the humiliation of the flight. When the aisle cleared, he carefully stood, clutching his carry-on bag. As he stepped into the aisle, Emma appeared again, blocking his way with an impatient huff. "Sir, could you move a little faster? We need to prepare for the next flight." James gave her a small, patient smile. "I'm moving as quickly as I can, ma'am." "Well, it doesn't feel like it," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for him to hear. James hesitated, taking a deep breath. "Have a good day, ma'am," he said softly, brushing past her. The terminal was bustling with activity, but James moved steadily toward the baggage claim. As he stood waiting for his suitcase, he noticed Emma just a few feet away, chatting animatedly with another flight attendant. Their laughter rang out, carefree and loud, as though the events on the plane had never occurred. James averted his gaze, focusing on the carousel. His suitcase eventually appeared, and he reached for it, only to have it snagged against another bag. As he struggled to free it, a young man in a business suit stepped forward to help. "Here, sir, let me—" James looked up, startled by the act of kindness.
"Thank you, son."
"Much appreciated." The man gave him a respectful nod. "Not a problem. Safe travels." The simple gesture warmed James's heart, even if only briefly. It reminded him that not everyone was as cold as Emma. As he made his way out of the terminal, James couldn't shake the weight of the day's events. He had endured discrimination before, too many times to count, but something about today had cut deeper. Perhaps it was because he was on his way to see Mia, and he had hoped for nothing but joy in the hours leading up to their reunion. A sharp voice interrupted his thoughts.
"Hey."
"Sir." James turned to see Emma approaching, her expression stern. For a moment, he wondered if she was about to offer an apology, though her demeanor suggested otherwise. "You forgot this," she said, holding out a small item. James glanced at her hand. It was his pen, the one he had used to fill out his customs form on the plane. He hadn't even noticed he'd dropped it. "Thank you," he said, taking it. "I appreciate it." Emma's lips tightened. "Next time, try to keep track of your belongings. We don't have time to clean up after passengers." James blinked, stunned by her unnecessary jab. "I'll keep that in mind," he replied evenly. As she turned to leave, James couldn't resist asking, May I ask you something? Emma paused, looking over her shoulder. What? Did I do something to offend you? He asked, his voice calm but firm. Her eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Your behavior toward me today, he continued. It felt personal. I just want to understand. Why? Emma scoffed, folding her arms. It wasn't personal. I was just doing my job. James nodded slowly. Then I hope you treat all passengers with the same diligence. Her cheeks flushed, but she said nothing, turning sharply on her heel and walking away. Later that evening, James arrived at Ethan's house, where Mia greeted him with an enthusiastic hug. Her laughter and excitement melted away the day's bitterness, if only temporarily. Grandpa, she exclaimed, tugging at his hand. Come see my cake. It's shaped like a unicorn. James chuckled, letting her lead him inside. A unicorn, huh? That's fancy. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the warm glow of the living room. Dad, you made it, he said, his smile wide. I wouldn't miss this for the world, James replied, clasping his son's hand. As the evening unfolded, James tried to push the day's events to the back of his mind. But as he sat on the couch, watching Mia open her presents, Ethan noticed his father's quiet demeanor. Dad, is everything okay? Ethan asked, sitting beside him. James hesitated. It's nothing, son. Just a long day of travel. Ethan studied him, his brow furrowing. You sure? James forced a smile. I'm sure. Let's not spoil Mia's day. Ethan nodded, though he wasn't convinced. The following morning, James woke early and joined Ethan in the kitchen for coffee. The house was quiet, with Mia still asleep and the rest of the family enjoying a lazy Sunday. Dad, Ethan began, breaking the silence. I can't shake the feeling that something happened yesterday. James sighed, stirring his coffee. It was nothing I haven't dealt with before. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? James hesitated, then relented. The flight attendant, she wasn't exactly welcoming. Ethan's expression darkened. What happened? She made some assumptions, James said carefully. Treated me like I didn't belong. But it's done now. No need to dwell on it. No need to dwell on it. Ethan repeated, his voice rising. Dad, you shouldn't have to deal with that. Especially not on one of my flights. James looked up, startled. One of your flights? Ethan nodded.
Yeah.
That was our airline. I was going to tell you. I had a surprise planned for Mia's birthday, and I wanted you to see the new planes. James was silent, his gaze dropping to the table. Why didn't you say anything? Ethan pressed. Because it doesn't change anything, James replied. I didn't want to make waves. Ethan stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen. This is unacceptable. I need to know exactly what happened. Son, James began, his tone measured. It's not about revenge or making a scene. It's about knowing that some people carry their own burdens and prejudices. I don't need to fight every battle. Ethan stopped, his jaw tight. But you shouldn't have to fight this battle at all. James reached out, placing a hand on Ethan's arm. I raised you to stand for what's right, and I know you will. But for now, let's just focus on family. Ethan nodded reluctantly, though the determination in his eyes was unmistakable. Unbeknownst to James, Ethan had already decided that this wouldn't be the end of the story. Something needed to change, and he would make sure of it. Ethan Carter was not one to let things slide. Growing up, he had watched his father navigate life with grace, even when faced with blatant injustices. But as Ethan built his company, a company founded on respect and dignity, he vowed that such behavior would have no place in his organization. That afternoon, after ensuring James was comfortably settled, Ethan retreated to his home office. He opened his laptop, scanning his email inbox until he found what he was looking for, the flight manifest. His pulse quickened as he spotted the name, Emma Stone. Picking up the phone, he dialed his executive assistant, Sarah, who answered on the second ring. Sarah, it's Ethan. I need the employee file for flight attendant named Emma Stone. She worked yesterday's route from Atlanta to Chicago. There was a pause. Of course, sir. Is everything okay? It will be, Ethan replied, his voice tight. Just get me the file as soon as you can. Meanwhile, Emma Stone had no idea that her actions were about to come back to haunt her. She had finished her shift and was relaxing in the airline's crew lounge, chatting with a colleague. "Passengers can be so entitled," she said, rolling her eyes. "You wouldn't believe this guy from my last flight. Thought he belonged in executive class. I had to put him in his place." Her colleague raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure he wasn't supposed to be there?" Emma waved the question away. "Please. He didn't look like he belonged. It's always the ones trying to sneak in where they don't fit." The conversation was cut short when her phone buzzed. It was a message from her manager. "Report to my office tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. We need to discuss yesterday's flight." Emma frowned, her stomach twisting slightly. She hadn't expected any repercussions. After all, passengers rarely complained. Still, she couldn't shake the unease that crept in as she read the message again. The next morning, Ethan arrived at his corporate office, his mind set. Sarah had already sent over Emma's personnel file, and Ethan had reviewed it carefully. There were no formal complaints against her, but he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that her behavior on the flight was not an isolated incident. At 9 a.m. sharp, Emma entered the conference room where Ethan and Sarah were waiting. She looked confident, though a hint of nervousness flickered in her eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she said, offering a polite smile. "Good morning, Miss Stone. Please have a seat." She sat, clasping her hands in her lap. "I understand you wanted to discuss yesterday's flight?" Ethan leaned forward, his expression calm but unyielding. "Yes, I do. I've received some troubling reports about your behavior toward a passenger." Emma's smile faltered. "I'm not sure I understand, sir." Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "Let me make it clear. The passenger in question was my father, James Carter. He was traveling in executive class, as indicated on his ticket. Yet, from the moment he arrived at the airport, you treated him with disrespect, culminating in you forcing him to move to the back of the plane. Is that correct?" Emma's face went pale. I didn't know he was your father," she stammered. "And if he weren't?" Ethan asked sharply. "Would your actions have been justified?" "I was just following protocol," Emma said defensively. "Sometimes passengers try to sit in sections they didn't pay for." Ethan cut her off. "My father had a legitimate ticket. There was no protocol requiring you to humiliate him, ignore his needs, or deny him basic courtesy." Emma opened her mouth to respond, but couldn't find the words. Ethan continued, his voice growing firmer. "This company was built on principles of respect and inclusivity, values inspired by my father's teachings. Your actions are not only a violation of those principles, but also a reflection of a deeper issue that I refuse to tolerate within this organization." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Carter, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean any harm. It was a misunderstanding." "This wasn't a misunderstanding, Miss Stone," Ethan interrupted. "It was a failure to see a person's worth beyond your own biases. My father has faced a lifetime of prejudice, and I will not allow my company to contribute to that." The meeting concluded with Emma being placed on immediate leave, pending further review. As she left the room, her confident facade crumbled, replaced by a mix of shame and fear. Ethan wasn't finished. He called a meeting with his senior leadership team, determined to address the broader implications of the incident. "This isn't just about one employee," he said, his tone resolute. "It's about the culture we've built, or failed to build. From this moment forward, I want mandatory training for every employee, from the top executives to the ground crew. We need to ensure that respect and empathy are at the core of everything we do." His team nodded, their expressions serious. They knew Ethan's expectations were high, but they also knew he wouldn't accept anything less. That evening, Ethan returned home to find James sitting on the porch, the setting sun casting a warm glow over his father's face. "Son," James said, smiling as Ethan approached. "How was your day?" Ethan sat beside him, exhaling deeply. "Eventful," James chuckled. "Sounds like you've been busy." "I have," Ethan admitted. "Dad, I need to tell you something. Yesterday's flight, it wasn't just another bad experience. It was a failure on my part. I should have done more to ensure this kind of behavior doesn't happen in my company." James placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Son, You can't control every action of every person. What matters is how you respond when something goes wrong. And I trust you to do what's right." Ethan nodded, his resolve strengthened. "I'm working on it, Dad. I promise you, this company will stand for the values you've always taught me: dignity, respect, and equality." James smiled, pride shining in his eyes. "That's all I could ever ask for." As the sun dipped below the horizon, father and son sat in companionable silence, the weight of the day lifting as they looked toward a brighter future. Unbeknownst to them, the story of James's treatment and Ethan's response was already beginning to spread, setting the stage for a reckoning far greater than either of them anticipated. The story of James Carter's mistreatment aboard the flight didn't stay confined to the walls of Ethan Carter's office. By the next morning, it had begun to ripple across the airline industry, fueled by a passenger who had been on the same flight and posted a detailed account online. The post read, "I witnessed something yesterday that left me both heartbroken and inspired. A man, an elderly gentleman, was treated unfairly by a flight attendant, seemingly because of his appearance. Little did she know, that man was the father of the airline's founder. Watching how his son handled the situation has restored some of my faith in humanity. We need more leaders like Ethan Carter who don't just talk about values but live them." The post gained traction quickly, with thousands of likes and comments pouring in. Some users expressed outrage at the discrimination, while others applauded Ethan for taking swift action. The company's social media team, caught off guard, flagged the post to Ethan's attention. In his office, Ethan read the post in silence, his jaw tightening. He had hoped to address the situation internally, but now it was clear that the world was watching. "Sarah," he called, his voice firm. "Yes, sir?" Sarah appeared in the doorway, clutching a tablet displaying the viral post. "Prepare a statement," Ethan instructed. "We need to address this immediately. And schedule a meeting with the entire executive team. I want every department aligned on how we move forward." "Yes, sir," Sarah said, her tone reflecting the urgency of the moment. The meeting room buzzed with tension as Ethan stood at the head of the table, addressing his senior leadership team. "We are facing a moment that will define this company's legacy," Ethan began. "What happened to my father is unacceptable, but this isn't just about one incident. It's about the values we stand for as a business. This is our opportunity to show the world who we really are." The team nodded, though some exchanged nervous glances. Ethan continued, outlining a series of immediate actions. A public apology, both to his father and to any passengers who had faced similar treatment. Comprehensive, mandatory training programs on diversity, inclusion, and customer service for all employees. A review of hiring and promotion practices to ensure accountability and inclusivity across the board. "This is not just damage control," Ethan emphasized. "This is about doing what's right, not just for my father, but for every customer who chooses to fly with us." By the afternoon, the company's official statement was released. "We are deeply sorry for the treatment experienced by one of our valued passengers, Mr. James Carter, on one of our flights. Such behavior is contrary to the principles of respect and dignity that our company was founded on. We are taking immediate steps to ensure this never happens again, including mandatory training and a comprehensive review of our policies. We are committed to making this right." The statement was met with mixed reactions online. While many praised the company's response, others demanded more accountability. Calls for Emma's dismissal grew louder, with hashtags like #accountability-in-action trending across platforms. At home, James was unaware of the storm brewing online. He spent the day in the garden with Mia, her laughter a welcome distraction from the events of the past few days. "Grandpa, look at this flower," Mia said, holding up a bright yellow bloom. James smiled. "Beautiful, just like you." Ethan arrived home late that evening, his expression weary but determined. As he joined James on the porch, he handed him his phone. "You might want to see this," Ethan said. James squinted at the screen, scrolling through the flood of posts and comments. His face grew serious as he realized the extent of the public outcry. "Son," he said, handing the phone back, "I didn't ask for this." "I know, Dad," Ethan replied. "But this is bigger than us now. People need to see that we're willing to stand up for what's right. James nodded slowly. As long as it leads to real change, not just words. It will, Ethan promised. The following day, Ethan held a company-wide meeting, broadcast live to employees across all locations. He stood on a stage, addressing the room with conviction. What happened on that flight wasn't just a mistake, he said. It was a failure of culture, a failure to uphold the values that this company was built on. But failures are opportunities to grow, and we will grow from this. He outlined the new initiatives, emphasizing the company's commitment to inclusivity and respect. The employees listened intently, some visibly moved by Ethan's sincerity. Meanwhile, Emma Stone sat in a small conference room at the airline's headquarters, waiting for a meeting with HR. She was nervous, her mind racing with questions about her future. When the door opened, 2 HR representatives entered, their expressions serious. "Ms. Stone, thank you for coming in," one of them began. "We've reviewed the events of the flight and your subsequent behavior. After careful consideration, we've decided to terminate your employment, effective immediately." Emma's heart sank. "Please, I didn't mean to." "This decision isn't just about the flight," the representative interrupted. "It's about a pattern of behavior that doesn't align with our values. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." Emma left the building in a daze, the weight of her actions finally settling in. That evening, James and Ethan sat together on the porch once more. The air was cool, the sky painted with stars. "Son," James said, his voice thoughtful, "you've handled this with more grace than I could have imagined." "I learned from the best," Ethan replied, smiling. James chuckled. "Maybe. But don't let this harden your heart. Keep building something good, something you can be proud of." "I will," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I promise." The 2 men sat in silence, the night peaceful around them. Though the journey had been painful, it had also sparked a change, one that would ripple far beyond the walls of the company, touching the lives of countless others. Unbeknownst to them, the story of their bond, resilience, and commitment to justice was inspiring others to reflect on their own actions, proving that even in the face of injustice, dignity and compassion could prevail. The fallout from the incident continued to ripple through the airline and beyond. News outlets picked up the story, turning it into a national conversation about bias, accountability, and leadership. James Carter, once an unassuming passenger, became an emblem of quiet dignity in the face of adversity. Though James was reluctant to step into the public eye, Ethan encouraged him to share his story. "Dad, people need to hear from you. They need to understand why this matters." After much thought, James agreed. He wasn't seeking fame, but if his experience could spark change, it would be worth it. A week later, James found himself on a stage at a company town hall, addressing an audience of airline employees and executives. Cameras from local media outlets were positioned at the back of the room, capturing the moment. He adjusted the microphone, his hands steady despite the weight of the moment. "Good afternoon," he began, his deep voice resonating through the room. "I'm James Carter, and I want to share a little about my journey, both on that flight and in life." The room fell silent, everyone captivated by the quiet strength in his tone. "I've lived a long life," James continued. "I've seen progress, and I've seen setbacks. I've been treated with kindness, and I've been treated with disrespect. What happened to me on that flight wasn't new, but it was a reminder of how far we still have to go." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "But let me tell you something. What gives me hope isn't that the world is perfect. It's that people are willing to learn, to grow, and to make things right. My son, Ethan, is proof of that." Ethan, seated in the front row, felt his chest tighten with emotion as James gestured toward him. This company was built on values that Ethan learned from his mother and me: dignity, respect, and the belief that every person matters. Those values don't just live in policies or slogans. They live in the way you treat someone, especially when no one's watching. The audience erupted into applause, and James smiled, his heart swelling with a sense of fulfillment. The changes Ethan implemented took root quickly. The airline launched a new program called Fly with Respect, which included workshops, mentorship opportunities, and community outreach programs. Employees who completed the program spoke about its impact, sharing stories of how it had changed their perspectives. Even customers noticed the difference. The airline began receiving letters and emails praising the improved service and the company's efforts to create a welcoming environment for all. For James, life returned to its quiet rhythm. He spent his days gardening, reading, and cherishing moments with Mia, whose curiosity about the events inspired many heartfelt conversations. "Grandpa," she asked one afternoon, "why did that lady on the plane treat you so badly?" James sighed, kneeling beside her in the garden. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people judge others without really knowing them. It's not right, but it happens. Did it make you sad?" "A little," he admitted. "But what matters is how we respond." Instead of getting angry, I tried to show her that kindness and respect are more powerful than hate. Mia nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad you did." James smiled, brushing a speck of dirt from her cheek. "Me too, my little sunshine." Months later, Ethan surprised James with an announcement. "Dad, we're renaming one of our newest planes after Mom." James's eyes widened. "Your mother?" "Yes," Ethan said, smiling. "We're calling it the Margaret Carter, in honor of her strength and the values she passed down to us. It'll serve as a reminder of what this company stands for." James felt tears well in his eyes, his voice thick with emotion. "She would have been so proud of you, Ethan." "I know I am." The day of the unveiling was sunny and bright, with a crowd gathered at the airport to witness the dedication ceremony. James stood beside Ethan, gazing at the sleek aircraft bearing his wife's name. As the crowd applauded, James leaned over to Ethan. "You've built something remarkable, son. And it's only the beginning." Ethan smiled. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad." Together, they watched as the Margaret Carter took its first flight, a symbol of hope and progress, soaring into the sky. For James, it was a moment of vindication, not just for himself, but for the generations before him who had fought for respect and equality. And for Ethan, it was a reminder that the legacy he carried forward was as much about the past as it was about the future. As the plane disappeared into the horizon, James turned to Ethan with a smile. "You've made me proud, son. Keep flying high." Ethan nodded, his heart full. "Always, Dad. Always." And with that, their journey, rooted in resilience, love, and the unyielding pursuit of justice,